think when it comes to mental health and gun violence, I think something that we haven't unpacked is the intergenerational trauma that's passed down.
Trauma is passed down through the generations, and it's also passed down in communities. Many of these communities have had beefs that have lasted 25 years, and they don't even know how it or where it originated from.
So it becomes this vicious cycle where you live in a neighborhood where you've grown up with community violence, you've witnessed it. It makes you feel insecure, scared.
So they would rather shoot than be shot. And they would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6.
Now more than ever, our youth are becoming a growing target for Philadelphia's gun violence crisis. Al-Dia previously looked at some of the legislative factors that contribute to its surge, but that is just one part of this bigger issue. As of November 12, 2021, 88% of all shooting victims are men, 85% are Black, and 52% are between the ages of 18 and 30. More than previous years, those involved in gun violence are getting younger than that. In these communities of color most affected by the crisis, trauma plays a major role in its surge. That's why Al-Dia spoke to a number of people involved at all levels across the city who can attest to its causes and effects, and how it all starts at home.
I think when it comes to mental health and gun violence, I think something that we haven't unpacked is the intergenerational trauma that's passed down.
Generational trauma is passed down. It's passed down biologically, genetically rather, and also just from learned behavior, right? Like seeing behavior as a child, normalizing it, picking up on it, and using it. And many of my students struggle with anger because their families solve problems with violence, right? Whether that's getting a beating, whether that's getting punched, whether that's fighting.
Some of that learned behavior is also an inability to express feelings with one's family.
Many of my students are tiptoeing around their feelings in their own households and suppressing all of those feelings. It doesn't really leave much room to cope with anything else if we're not able to expel it.
When I was growing up, I used to hear things like people used to say, oh, this guy got shot over, he stepped on somebody's shoe, or he did that because he bumped them. And I used to always think to myself back then even, that's not really the reason, right? If somebody is gonna shoot you because you stepped on their shoe, for example, it's deeper than that, right? This is somebody that's walking around with great mental anguish. And so the language of violence is often used when people don't have the verbal language to really express the pain.
I know that many mothers who feel very helpless with their children's anger, right? With their children's outbursts, with the trouble that their children are getting in. And many times of those children that they are raising are at a higher risk of committing acts of violence.
That violence at home is then brought into communities dealing with their own forms of intergenerational trauma and conflict.
Trauma is passed down through the generations, and it's also passed down in communities. Many of these communities have had beefs that have lasted 25 years, and they don't even know how it or where it originated from, or it's just always been there.
People don't even know why they're at war. You know, there's people that, because they're born in a particular neighborhood in Philly, they're automatically a part of a war.
This war then fuels their fear and makes them want to protect themselves. This is where many start to carry guns.
When you ask them, well, why did you have a gun? They will tell you because of protection.
And so what I found in my research, and I think what a lot of place-based scholars will find, is that really it's the environment, the context of the neighborhood that shapes it. And when I begin to peel back their lives, what you'll find is that these are not criminally dangerous people. They were not these murderers that people said, but they found themselves in a situation in their environment which led them to committing an act of homicide.
So it becomes this vicious cycle where you live in a neighborhood where you've grown up with community violence, you've witnessed it. It makes you feel insecure, scared. And when everybody in your neighborhood seems to be carrying a gun, you don't want to be the one person who's bringing a fist to a gunfight, so you bring a gun. And so they see that as a necessary evil.
So they would rather shoot than be shot.
And as the kids will say, I'd rather be judged by 12
than carried by 6.
This very real fear that they have for their lives often conflicts with their need to remain masculine.
They're scared, but they're not going to come out and say, yes, I'm scared. Because that they see as a sign of weakness or not masculine or anything of that sort.
This idea of masculinity having to be respected at all times, especially for Black males, we have a monolithic view of masculinity, the tough guy.
This masculinity often plays out for young people in the form of embellishment to preserve their reputation.
When they're in the large group, they're going to say, oh, yeah, I was carrying a 40. But when you read the court report or you read the actual facts of the case, you really realize that it wasn't that at all. They feel like that they have to perpetrate a fraud for even people that they don't know.
Their reputation means everything to them, and they are literally willing to kill and to die to protect it. And what you find from, when you work behind the scenes and you meet these families is that so often these kids are just dying for the most mundane, silly reasons.
There are times when I go to court and I'm actually reading the case file, and it's like I see how it started, and it's something so stupid. It's something from social media. This person was talking about me. This person used to date this person and now they're dating another person. And then it just leads to a shooting or a homicide, which it doesn't make sense at all. And we look at the case and we're amazed. Like, this stimulated from what? It could have been avoided.
Part of the reasons these deaths happen is due to a lack of proper conflict resolution.
I asked this young guy, he was in a street beef, and I was asking, why can't you end the street beef? And he was saying basically, like, I could try to talk to that individual, but how do I know if it's really over? And so I think it becomes, how do you settle disputes when there's not a mechanism of formal social control? So now you said, if you step on my shoes or if you spill something on my shirt, it becomes a way bigger deal than it has to.
With all of this swirling in the community, it breeds a sense of hopelessness amongst young people caught in the middle.
For a long time, I've talked to young Black men and young Latinos who've talked about, like this feeling like, man, if I make it to 21. And that line has been used a lot in different stories, but I wish that people would really sit with what that means. It should break all of our hearts. It should be a reminder that whatever's happening, not just in Philadelphia, but in this world, is not working when there are young people who think, I hope I make it. And then when they make it, I hope I make it, much past that. Anytime I talk to young people about what it's like, you could see the trauma, you could see the stress, and the thing that we forget is that they take that stress home, outside to the streets, to school. When you are weighed down by that kind of stress, tell me that it's going to be easy for you to pay attention, to be in school, to have meaningful relationships. No, because your mind is always in survival mode somewhere else. Sometimes I imagine what it must be like to be a young person in Philadelphia in, say, like a high school classroom, to look around and think, I wonder how many of us are going to make it. Because the reality is not all of you are going to make it.
With all that has been said about the intersection between trauma and gun violence in Philadelphia, we heard from the adults that watch it. In the next episode, we will hear from the youth that live it.